Under the blazing noon sun, the desert stretched harsh and unending, a broad plain of washed sand and wind-carved rock. The heat rippled through the air, shadows slicing sharp against the ground. Two tiny silhouettes emerged from the vast desolation, stepping barefoot over scorched soil. Their clothing hung in damaged strips. Dust, pain, and salt tears marked their cheeks. Their fingers stayed locked, driven by survival instinct. They were twins, 5 years old, black-haired daughters of the Apache people. The land tried to erase them. Their lips split dry, breaths ran thin, thin. Yet they repeated the only sentence they trusted, a plea small as drifting wind. Please don't beat us. Ma is fading fast already. The horse rider who caught their voices moved steady across void silence. Thomas Red sat firm in the saddle, shaped by decades of ranch welding, grit, and open land tolerance. He avoided snap conclusions. The sight of the twins pulled a deep reaction from him, quiet but intense. He guided his horse to a stop. He stepped down smooth. He knelt low to meet their eye height. No haste, no disorder. The children jerked back, expecting violence. They met cruelty early, but his hand offered a canteen instead. He tipped water slow, letting droplets meet their mouths gently. They sipped like cautious birds, coughing, shaking, pulling in fragile breath between small drinks. Then they moved closer, like shadow safety finally recognized them. They shared their history in fractured whispers. Their mother lived widowed and alone. Her husband's family attacked her dignity, starving her spirit for her poverty. The in-laws pushed her and her daughters into the desert to disappear, assuming the world would look away. The twins wandered seeking rescue, steps shortening with every mile. Each detail landed heavy like open evidence, Thomas's anger burning steady and controlled in his ribs. He asked their mother's location. The girls lifted shaking arms, pointing toward a basin sheltered by stone and dry brush. Without hesitation, he lifted them onto his horse, their tiny arms clinging to his vest, and walked on foot toward the place. There, beneath the bent shape of a dying musquite, lay the woman they had spoken of, Nieli. Her hair spread across the earth like dark river water, her skin pale with fever, her breath shallow but not yet gone. She tried to rise when she saw him, tried to shield her daughters, even in her weakness, but the effort was too much, and she sagged back with a whisper of pain. Thomas bent low, speaking not as a stranger, but as one who wished no harm. He eased her head into his hands, felt the heat of fever, and knew she had not much time unless she found shelter. His decision came like breath itself, unforced, undeniable. He lifted her in his arms, her weight fragile as a bird's, and carried her to the horse where her daughters already waited. Carefully, he placed her before them, steadying her swaying body with his own. And with one hand on the rez, he led them back toward his ranch at the edge of the desert. The journey was long, yet each step seemed to draw a thread between them, fragile but unbreakable. When at last the low outline of the ranch came into view, a weathered cabin, a leaning barn, a fence half broken but standing still, the children stirred with awe. To them it was not merely a home, but a fortress against the cruelty of the world. Inside, the air carried the scent of woodsome smoke and leather. Thomas gave the girls bread soft enough to tear with their small hands and wrapped them in quilts worn from years of use. They ate in silence, wide-eyed, glancing often at the door to be sure it would not open to some harsh intruder. He assured them with no more than his presence, steady as an oak. Then he turned to Nieli. Laying her on a cot by the fire, he crushed herbs he had gathered on his rides, mixed them with water, and pressed the bitter draught to her lips. Through the long night, he sat by her, tending the flames, wiping her brow, listening to her fevered murmurs. When morning came, her fever broke like a storm giving way to clear sky. Her eyes opened dark and uncertain, and she saw him still there, the children asleep beside him. A question trembled in her voice. Why? Why would a man with no tie to them bear such burden? He did not answer with speeches, only with a quiet truth, because no one should be left to die alone in the dust. Days passed. The girls began to laugh again, their bare feet running over the packed earth of the yard, chasing chickens and petting the horse that had carried them. They brushed its mane with solemn concentration, proud of their new duty. Thomas watched them from a distance, his face unreadable, yet softened at the edges. Nieli, though still weak, sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, her gaze drawn always to her daughter's joy. For the first time since her banishment, a fragile hope stirred in her heart. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon and shadows stretched long, Nieli spoke to Thomas. Her voice was rough, but clear enough to carry the truth of her heart. I thought the world had no kindness left, she said. Her eyes shone not with fever, but with tears held back too long. Thomas, seated by the firelight, met her gaze steadily. Kindness is all a man can leave behind, he replied. And in that moment, the silence between them deepened into something more than gratitude, more than chance. The fire crackled. The twins leaned against their mother, their small faces peaceful and asleep. Outside, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving. Yet within the cabin walls, a different world had been born. Fragile, trembling, but alive. What began as a desperate plea had become the spark of something enduring. And though none of them spoke it aloud, each felt the truth. Their story had only just begun. The days slipped by as if carried on the slow wind that wound through the canyons, and the ranch no longer felt like the lonely refuge it once had been, and where silence had once pressed heavy against the walls. Laughter now threaded through the air like bird song, eel thread song. Aoka and Nalin chased each other across the yard, their dark air streaming behind them, their shouts as bright as the sun above. Thomas Red watched from the corral where he mended a post, his steady hands working the wood while his eyes followed the girls with a softness he never thought would belong to him. Neely stood nearby, her shawl gathered at her shoulders, her strength returning with each sunrise. She had begun to move with a quiet confidence again, her hands busy with mending clothes and tending to the garden. She coaxed from the hard soil. Yet beneath the warmth of newfound peace, shadows lingered. Neely still woke at night with a start, fear clutching her chest, haunted by memories of blows and curses hurled by her husband's kin. She had learned too well how quickly a roof could turn to a cage, how swiftly love could sour into cruelty. Often she looked at Thomas with a weary heart, questioning if this safety could truly last. But Thomas did not press her with promises or demand her trust. He simply showed it day after day in the quiet strength of his labor, in the way he placed bread at her table before his own, in how he listened more than he spoke. One morning the peace was broken. Hobbs thundered in the distance, a harsh sound against the stillness. Two figures appeared at the edge of the yard. Hosea and Jedediah Blackthorn, the brothers who had cast Neely aside. Their faces were carved with bitterness, their voices harsh as they called her name. Neely froze on the porch, her breath catching as if the desert itself had stolen it. The twins clung to her skirt, their eyes wide with dread. The men dismounted, spurs clinking against the dry earth, and strode forward with the entitlement of those who believed cruelty was their right. You belong with your husband's people, Hosea spat, his voice hard as gravel. She shuddered at the memory of their fists, the coldness in their eyes. Jedediah sneered, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol, as if violence were as natural as breathing. Thomas stepped into their path, calm and immovable, his broad shoulders blocking the way. His voice, when it came, was steady as the ground beneath their boots. You left them to die. You'll not touch them again. The blackthorns bristled, their rage rising, but Thomas's gaze did not falter. He did not reach for his gun, though his hand rested near enough to remind them he was no stranger to its use. His strength was not in the threat of violence, but in the quiet certainty that he would not yield. The tension stretched taut as a bull ring. For a moment it seemed the air itself might shatter with blood, but something in his stillness unnerved them as if the land itself stood with him. With curses under their breath, the brothers turned, mounting their horses with hateful glares. They rode away in a cloud of dust, their defeat sharp in their silence. When the sound faded, Neely sank to her knees, trembling, the weight of fear, giving way to a rush of tears. Her daughters clung to her, sobbing in relief. Thomas knelt beside her, his rough hand resting gently on her shoulder, not as possession, but as steadying comfort. She met his eyes and saw no pride there, no hunger for control, only the quiet assurance of a man who had chosen to stand between her and the cruelty of the world. That night, beneath the sky jeweled with stars, Neely sat by the fire outside the cabin. The air was cool, the scent of sage drifting with the wind. Thomas sat across from her, his face lit by the flames, etched in gold and shadow. She spoke softly, her words breaking like water over stone. I have known too much pain. I thought myself broken, unworthy of love. His eyes held hers, and he answered with a voice low but firm. You are not broken. You are brave. Braver than any I've known. The silence that followed was not empty but alive. Filled with all the unspoken truths neither dared name aloud. Time passed, and the wounds of fear slowly gave way to the tenderness of trust. The ranch became more than a shelter. It became a home. The twins called Thomas Pa without hesitation, their voices ringing with belonging. Aya. Nayli's laughter began to rise more often, soft at first, then rich and unguarded, surprising even herself. And in the quiet moments when their hands brushed while passing tools or their eyes lingered too long in silence, something deeper began to root itself between them. One evening, as the sky burned with the hues of dusk, a preacher traveling the frontier came to the ranch. His presence was simple, his voice humble, and before him stood Thomas and Nieli, their hands joined, their daughters watching with bright eyes. It was not a wedding of grandeur, no finery nor music, only vows spoken in the glow of lanterns and the warmth of family. When the words were said and their hands bound together, it was as if the desert itself sighed in relief. Later, as the twins slept curled beside the hearth, Nieli leaned into Thomas, her voice soft with wonder. "I thought I had lost everything." He drew her close, his reply as steady as the earth beneath them. "Sometimes the desert takes only to give back more than we dreamed." The fire flickered, the stars stretched endless above, and within those fragile walls, a family was born, proof that even in a land of hardship, love could bloom like a hidden